It's been said that James Cameron can go to his grave knowing that he directed two of the greatest movie sequels of all time. The first would be Terminator 2, which I pretty much agree with, and this would be the second, which to me is debatable. To set the record straight, even though it definitely has moments of horror, I would really classify it as a very suspenseful action movie, which Cameron excels at. As far as sequels go, it does expand on the story of the original. It gives us more aliens, and the characters are pretty memorable, which is quite a feat for a film that has a foot in the sci-fi, action, and horror genres all at once. That alone makes it a very good sequel. But whether people like it better than the first one is a matter of preference. After all, aside from the story, they really are two very different kinds of films. I like it as much as the first one, but it does have a few minor things that I'd like to address. First of all, it's a very long film, and this is one of those movies that has an alternate extended version that adds quite a bit of extra footage. Cameron tends to prefer the extended version to the theatrical one, which is contrary to Ridley Scott's take on his own director's cut of Alien. Don't get me wrong, I like long movies if it's appropriate, but there are some genres, namely action and horror, that usually don't lend themselves to the longer format. Like with T2, Cameron tends to circumvent this with some more thought-provoking scenes in the middle of the action. This is another staple of Cameron's style. Unlike a Michael Bay film, which doesn't seem to know when to let up the action once it starts, Cameron treats his films very much like an oncoming hurricane. It starts out pretty intense, segues into the eye of the storm with some calm material, and then picks up again full throttle. This is apparent in a lot of his films, like the first two Terminators, Titanic, and even Avatar. I certainly appreciate this pacing, although for some reason Aliens feels a little uneven. It starts out kind of slow, as the film explains what happened to Ripley since the events of Alien. Ripley, the sole survivor of her crew, has been drifting around in space, asleep for 57 years. She's abducted incidentally by her space expedition and brought back to Earth, only to find herself stripped of her piloting license and brought up on charges due to the mysterious loss of the company's ship. After all, without evidence of the alien that terrorized the crew, Ripley would be the prime suspect. The most depressing part of all this is that during her sleep in space, her daughter passed away of old age, which is even more tragic given that she was 11 when Ripley left. In the meantime, Ripley finds that people have begun colonizing on the original alien planet, which the company has called LV-426. When the company loses contact with one of the families, a group of roughneck Marines are brought in to investigate, with Ripley as a consultant. Obviously, they all think she's crazy, having made up everything about the xenomorphs.
It must have laid something inside his throat, some sort of embryo. He started...
Look, man, I only need to know one thing. Where they are.
But of course, it's all set up, getting us ready for the real thrill ride. It all sounds great on paper, and it throws some pretty emotional stuff our way.
See you, Hicks.
Dwayne. It's Dwayne.
Ellen.
Don't be gone long, Ellen.
It establishes better than in the first film who Ripley is, and again, all the Marines are pretty memorable characters.
Somebody said alien, she thought they said illegal alien and signed up.
Fuck you, man.
Aside from Bill Paxton playing the likable redneck Private Hudson, my favorite is the character of Bishop played by Lance Henriksen, an android that Ripley immediately finds prejudice with because of her experience with a malfunctioning android on her last journey. Bishop really doesn't serve a huge purpose to the mission, but he turns out to be a very sympathetic character, and it's fun to see him and Ripley form a bond toward the end of the film. I think the reason why this setup bothers me is because, while it's much more involved in the opening to the first film, it doesn't prepare us for what's to come. The first movie was pretty much subtle the whole way through, even when the alien starts killing people. In this film, the aliens come out of nowhere, which works in a different way, but you also have to remember it's probably a good hour before the action really starts. It's an extremely small flaw to point out, and I'm sure most people won't even understand what I'm talking about, but to me it's all about the pace. Now once the movie gets going, it really is a non-stop thrill ride. Much to their surprise, the Marines encounter the xenomorphs at close range, and they get ambushed pretty quickly. The rest of the movie just has them trying to survive until a rescue ship comes for them, which Bishop spends a lot of the movie trying to summon. The Marines also find a little girl named Newt, whose family has been killed off by the aliens. The girl reminds Ripley of her daughter, so naturally Ripley warms up to her right away.
Hard to believe there's a little girl under all this.
Ripley also befriends Corporal Dwayne Hicks, the only grunt she grows close to. Cameron intended Ripley, Newt, and Hicks to form a family unit, and had Cameron gone on to direct the next sequel, he's been quoted as saying that he would have carried them over to continue that theme. There's also a questionable businessman-type jerk named Carter Burke, the one who actually assigns Ripley the mission. The whole movie you're questioning this guy as there's something about him you just don't trust. It's a great duality of character that changes everything around, much like what happened to Ash in the first movie. Now, by far the coolest part of this movie is when Ripley discovers the Queen alien. They hint at her presence in the middle of the film when they stumble across some of the xenomorph eggs, and it makes you wonder, how did the eggs get there in the first place? Well, like any insect kingdom, a larger-than-life queen lays the eggs, bringing the evolution of the xenomorphs into full circle. All I can say about the Queen is that she's pretty badass. Say whatever you want about Alien vs. Predator, but even in that movie the Queen simply dominated. Whenever the Queen shows up, it's a movie spectacle that can't be explained until you see it. The thing is, when we're first introduced to the Queen, she's attached to this giant larva sac, which she uses to lay her eggs, so she can't move very much. That's until she separates herself from the sac. Then she attacks Ripley, and it all boils down to a countdown to see who can outlive the other. It's epic and makes experiencing the whole movie worth it. What did I say? I'm not sure if it's one of the greatest sequels of all time. Well, you know what? Forget what I said. It's an awesome sequel. Even if the actual movie isn't as good as a lot of people claim it to be, just talking about it is a blast. There's so many things going on here, and the whole time it expands the story of the original. Now, granted, it didn't have much to work with. The original Alien is just a simple slasher camouflaged as a slick sci-fi film. But the point I'm trying to make is it could have been just a mindless follow-up, just like any other horror sequel. But it's not. The characters are developed, there's some emotional resonance on many levels, and the ending kicks ass. These are things I always praised about the film, and I don't dare dispute them. I think the only truly disappointing thing to me, and again this is kind of minor, but it's always been at the back of my mind, there never seems to be a lot of aliens on screen at any given time. At most, there's only about 6 that appear on screen, and that's because they only made 6 outfits for the film. That's right, even though we're led to believe that there are hundreds, according to conversations between the Marines, we only see a few actually appear on screen.
How many?
Can't tell. Lots.
Do they make you believe there are more? I think they do, which is quite a feat. But still, it always gnawed on my mind that we only see 6 at any given time. The rest is left to the imagination. And it's not really false advertising either. The movie's called Alien, so really there only had to be a minimum of 2. Now that's nitpicking for you. Honestly, despite what I said earlier, this is a really hard one to pick apart because there are so many memorable moments. I mean, it's epic. I think what gets to me is the original film tends to get dramatically upstaged by its overambitious sequel. This isn't really that uncommon. The same thing seemed to happen with the Terminator. For years I didn't even know an original Terminator existed. Before T2, no one seemed to talk about it, but given the nature of T2, I can understand why. Alien, for being what it is an impressive little film and stands alone, so it's a little harder for me to let Aliens take the spotlight, even though both films are very impressive in their own right. But I can certainly see why people praise it so much, because certain aspects of it are better than its counterpart. It's faster and more of an event film. It had to have drawn a larger audience as well, because there are people who don't generally go to horror movies, but who love sci-fi and action, and that's the audience this one was most likely targeting. Aliens. Maybe not the most appropriate film for Halloween, but definitely a worthy sequel to one that was.
Hey, Vasquez. Have you ever been mistaken for a man?
No. Have you?
Oh, Vasquez. He just too bad.